We just love that song. It's so mellow and groovy and it just sets the stage. So welcome, hello, welcome to our podcast. Today is December 19th, 2024. And we're counting down to the 2025. And I am here with Annmarie Etuk Campbell. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. So, welcome everyone. Settle in and join us. We're going to have a very good conversation today because I'm really excited about our guest. And I'm going to get right in there and I'm going to read her wonderful bio. So here it is. Annmarie Etuk Campbell is the founder and owner of Supply the Change Psychotherapy Services Incorporated, where she brings her expertise as a registered psychotherapist, qualifying, and a Canadian certified counselor. Annmarie earned an honors of Bachelor of Arts degree in Cognitive Sciences, with a minor in psychology from York University and a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology from Yorkville University. Currently, Annmarie is pursuing a Doctor of Psychology in Grief Counseling, an area that she is passionate about and that we're definitely going to dissect and talk about today. I'm really excited about that. Annmarie specializes in working with individuals who are navigating significant life changes, burnout, coping with past or current traumas, and dealing with the complexities of grief. So that's 99% of us. Okay. Annmarie combines academic knowledge with compassion to promote mental health and well being, showing a true dedication to positively impacting her community. Her path highlights how education, resilience, and a strong desire to help others can lead to meaningful change. So, thank you so much, Annmarie, for being here and willing to share everything with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this.
Well, great, great. Well, we are definitely excited to have you because I mean, obviously, what it does. We just read your bio. We see the important work that you're doing and how ingrained you are in the mental wellness of people. That it really is forging. It's forging. It's helping to forge a path through. So, Black Mental Health Canada, we had to reach out. We had to make this happen. So, I'm glad that it's happening today. So I like how in the sort of the ending of your bio, it talks about her path highlights how education, resilience, and a strong desire to help others can lead to meaningful change. What does that mean? Unfold that for us a little bit.
Absolutely. So, in my last year of undergrad, my
Mhm.
last semester to be exact, I was taking 6 classes. My parents were in the midst of a divorce.
Mm.
So, there was just a lot of transitions for me. I have 3 younger siblings and the eldest daughter. And during that time, we were having to navigate court, navigate
Mhm.
them still being in school. I'm in the Toronto area. We moved out to Vaughan. So navigating
Mhm.
them, bringing them back to school there, me in school. I was also working and I was doing practicum. So it was a lot. And then in the middle of that, I was applying to grad school to throw another thing into the mix. So it was a constant battle truly to get me through undergrad, that final stretch, because I was so
Mhm.
determined to finish it in the 4 years. I didn't
Mhm.
want to take an extra semester, and my grad school application was depending on it. So I had to hyper focus, like many people do, and I was able to pull through. But it definitely, I had to have that resiliency to keep going, keep pushing day to day.
So wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. So separation, I mean all the things that you talked about, that is a lot to go through. What do you think so obviously there's resilience there. You had a focus, you had a goal, you had to get it done. What are some of the components that were taking place that allowed you to actually pull through at that time?
So I would say I had a really great support system with my
Mhm.
mom and my grandmother. My grandmother, she would actually like let me sleep over on the weekends. She would pre like meal prep. like food for the week.
Mhm.
So she really did a lot. I remember sometimes I would just go to grandma's house and I'd be crying.
Mhm.
But it was a lot to navigate, and it was
Mhm.
so many different life changes and transitionings happening at once. Um, at that point, I didn't really seek out a mental health support for
Mhm.
myself because I didn't see people who looked like me within the realm at the school, so I didn't feel comfortable sharing. And there was also a piece of shame where I just didn't want people
Mhm.
to know it was, you know, my business per se.
Mhm.
And there was some shame and guilt there. So I went with grandma, spoke with mom, and those were, I would say, some protective factors that got me through.
Okay, amazing. So two things are highlighted for me. I'll mention those things. You can comment, and then I want to talk about your role and what you're doing now and so forth. But so two things come stick out for me is how in the midst of things that are happening. So you mentioned your mom; she was there as a support. So your mom is going through her own challenges and difficulty, but she's also has her eye on her mothering and her daughter and things, and got to still keep it together. So in that, she's your source of support. Your grandma's
Mhm.
your source of support. So in the midst of things, we still keep it moving. We got to still keep it going. And then
Mhm.
the other aspect of that is like how that experience must enrich your practice right now, right? You have this practical life experience that you were able to get through, and now you can share. So, with all the credentials, and we know that that's really important, the life experience that you're going to bring to your clients, and with that genuineness and that, that they're going to be able to detect from you is must be really invaluable to the work that you do.
Yes, absolutely. I will say, like, when I have some clients that express what they're experiencing through school, through working,
Mhm.
because working didn't stop for me. That's why I picked an online program. I had to find a way to pay through it. So I really do relate to those themes, and I know what it's like to struggle. I often tell people that education saved my life
Hmm.
because there was just certain trends I didn't want to continue, and the way forward was going through education. It
Hmm.
took a lot of time, it took a lot of money and strength and focus, but truly those are some components. So when I hear things, I really do get it. I can't say I
Hmm.
understand because I'm not in their predicament, but I
Hmm.
truly do understand what it's like to have those
Hmm.
experiences.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so we'll come back there, but I
Mhm.
want to shift a little bit. So, talk to me about what your credential is. So, you've gone to school, you're applying to be a doctor. Walk us through what qualifying and what all of that means. Talk to us about that.
Sure. So with the CRPO, there's a certain number of hours you have to get. So the CRPO is the College of Registered Psychotherapists Ontario.
Hmm.
So there's a certain number of hours you have to get. There's a test that you have to write. Then you go from the qualifying stage to the just the full RP registered psychotherapist stage. So I'm still doing those hours and have to write that test, but I've been in practice since 2021.
Okay.
That's when I originally got registered.
Okay.
I'm still under supervision as well. So I have an awesome supervisor
Yes.
that's a social worker,
Okay.
and being a Canadian certified counselor, that is with the CCPA, so that's the Canadian realm of Psychological Association,
Hmm.
and that essentially I can see clients more provincially, so in
Okay.
different provinces that are unregulated still.
Hmm.
With my CCC, I can see those clients.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Good. So, you said you've been in practice since 2021. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, so and you found your organization. So talk to me a little bit about that. And I'm going to get the name of the where you founded Supply the Change Psychotherapy Services Incorporated.
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
okay,
So I actually that was a passion project of mine that started
mhm,
in 2019.
okay,
Originally, it started out as a nonprofit organization. So
mm,
I used to do a lot of work with schools. I would collect school supplies, donate them. Same thing with like used clothing, things of that nature. When I started my master's, then it morphed into doing things with mental health, especially when the pandemic hit.
Mm.
So I had done a couple workshops. And then when I started practicum, became in practice, I was working at another clinic. Um, it was very interesting to be under, somebody else's practice, see what that was like.
Mhm.
And then this year actually is when I had the courage to branch out and transform supply the change to what it is today.
Okay, okay, good.
Mhm.
So what is it today?
So today it is a psychotherapy practice. We
Mm.
still do the donation realm, not to the capacity that it was when we once started. So I wouldn't say that it's the primary focus,
Mhm.
but those key workshops with especially the Black community or community in general is still very important to me. I
Okay.
really want to make mental health accessible and mental health knowledge accessible. That is something I'm very passionate about. And on our logo, I like to point that out. There's a little pencil on it. And essentially, it's that writing your own healing story.
Okay.
So I don't believe when you go to therapy that the therapist writes your healing story. I think
Mhm.
that both of you write it together, and the therapist just facilitates that space for you to help write it.
Okay, I love that. I love that. So that's really sort of empowering the person that's coming, the counselee, whoever is coming in to get services. It's really empowering them to be a part of that healing journey and writing their story. And okay, that's magnificent. So
Mhm.
talk to me around like who are the kinds of clients that you see? Like, do you have a particular? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
You
I
let us.
would. So I see a mixed bag actually.
Mm-hmm.
I see some children. I see some adults. I see some like midlife adults. No seniors. Not that I'm opposed to it, but I would
Mm-hmm.
say from age 12, 11 to maybe like 55.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's quite a big
Mhm.
age range, and actually, it's because a lot of people are saying that there's not enough Black psychotherapists.
Okay.
So it's almost like, okay, you're Black, you met it, let
Yeah.
me try it out.
Right.
But it's just because there's a lack, truly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, okay, so I'll ask you, why do you think there's a lack? And then what
Mhm.
is it that we bring to the table as Black care providers, psychotherapists, counselors that is unique? Probably an obvious question, but you know what? I want to put it out there.
Yes, I would say there's a lack because of the taboo.
Yeah.
Still in our community around psychotherapy. It could be like for me, I'm Nigerian and Jamaican descent.
Hmm.
And even with that, like a lot of times it's like, what is that? Why do
Hmm.
you need therapy? Or
Hmm.
sometimes it's the spiritual component or of
Hmm.
are you not trusting God enough? Um, and in regards to what Black clinicians bring, I believe we bring that life experience piece and authenticity that a lot of people are looking for. So, just historically, Black people go through a lot.
Hmm.
Day to day, we go through a lot. If you hear the sirens go off at a store, for example, nobody looks to the white person if we're being
Hmm.
honest. They're going to look at the Black person first and ask you if you stole. So
Hmm.
there's just that similar experience among people of color in general of I don't know what maybe your culture is for Hispanic, for example, but we
Hmm.
have a commonality that we can relate to of what that experience is like of being a person of color.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And then so much goes unsaid, right? Like you said, like when they
Mhm.
see that you're Black, okay, yep, you're in, let's try this. Because there is so much that is evident with knowing that, okay, as a Black person, there's going to be things that you can identify with. And as the relationship unfolds, there's way that we speak and nuances that we can talk about that we just know that, okay, yeah, you get it, right? So
Yes.
totally right. Totally right. This might be a little off topic a little bit, but I have, when you talked about, stealing and that, I was in the store just the other day. I was in Shoppers Drug Mart and I heard
Mhm.
them make a comment on the, because I had gone in there a couple of times, I think in that day, because I was looking for something and then went back. And they
Mhm.
made the announcement over like security, paid security to something. I can't remember what the code was, And at the second time when I heard this, yeah, I actually said to the woman, it was a black woman at the cash register. I said,
Yeah.
I'm just I'm just wondering, is that a code for something like coming in like for me? And the fact that I had to ask that,
Oh
just the
my
other day,
goodness.
the fact that I had to
Yeah.
ask that and even feel that is an experience that, if you're not black or of any other ethnicity who's, racialized in that way or
Hmm.
stereotyped in that way, you wouldn't understand that experience, right?
Exactly. Very
Yeah,
true.
yeah,
Very true.
that's it. That's it. So
Mhm.
I wanted you to explain to us to break it down so I can ensure that our listeners know what is psychotherapy.
So, psychotherapy is a protected practice in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially it is psychology. So, there's different modalities, and modality is just another word for different ways that somebody might counsel.
Mm-hmm.
And psychotherapy is specifically for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So, I want to break psychotherapy down that it doesn't mean you have to have a problem to
Mm-hmm.
come and see a therapist. I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's something that has been heavily portrayed by the media, by movies. You see this big couch and
Mm-hmm.
someone's laying on it and talking, and that's just not what it is. COVID has proven that with how it's changed to being online, and it's essentially somewhere for you to talk and have a safe space. It
Mm-hmm.
could just be about day to day life stressors. It could be about trauma. It could be about grief. It could be about anything that you want it to be. But it doesn't have. You don't have to wait until you have a problem. You have that mental breakdown to recognize I need help.
Mm-hmm. And what are you finding, which I love, and I'm glad that you really broke that down because it's such a big word, and then it's so taboo on top of it. And then we'll talk about avoidance within our community in terms of really avoiding sitting down and really addressing mental health and talking about our problems. So I love how you really broke it down for us to really show it's not about the couch, it's not about there's a major problem. It's a space, a safe space where you can talk to somebody and really kind of work through life's challenges because
Mhm.
we're human. We have life challenges, regardless of
Yes.
where you are, what your skin color is, what's going on. If you're a human being, we have life challenges, and we all need a support and a helping hand. And so that's
Mhm.
essentially what you have dedicated your studies and your life to, and
Yeah.
this is what you're able to do. Exactly right. What are is there a typical thing that you're seeing people come in to talk to you about?
I'll say post COVID,
Mhm.
especially, finances has been a big one.
Mm,
Um, Social anxiety, so what
mm,
it's like to be around people again, what it looks like. For some people that are immune compromised, it's
mm,
how do I navigate life again now that it's normal.
mhm,
Anxiety is another big one, and there has been a lot of grief, not
mhm,
one with the losses of course, but
mhm,
two, who they were pre-COVID is something that I've found that
mhm,
I'll hear, oh, I used to be so outgoing, or I used to be open to X and Y, and
mhm,
now post COVID I feel more maybe like a hermit or in my shell. I don't want to
mhm,
try new things anymore. I want it to be succinct and what I expect it to be versus putting myself out there again.
mhm. Okay. And what do you think is like the aha moments for people, right? So I know that where I'm
Mhm.
trying to um, narrow this thing down, and we know that there's nothing streamlined about our experiences or anything. But if there is anything that you can kind of say, you know what, this is what I notice with people is the aha moments with people I work with, and you can talk about it in terms of the modality that you use, like the sort of the framework that you use. Is
Mhm.
there anything that really kind of says to people, yeah, I never thought of it that way, or, you know?
So I'm a narrative lover. I love narrative therapy.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, the aha moment is often found when I'll say the example that I tell my clients, which
Mhm,
is some days we make baby steps and some days we make elephant steps. What matters is we're still stepping.
mhm,
Because oftentimes people will maybe retract or go back to the old behaviors, the old patterns, and they'll feel disappointed and guilt and shame. And it's like, okay, we made a step back, but we're still stepping. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
stop, you're still trying. How can we maybe make a greater step or more steps to who you want to envision, who you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
So I find that that's the aha moment, that it's, I don't have to be perfect.
Right.
And maybe that's something that comes up when people think that they go to therapy, and they think I need to impress my psychotherapist that I made all this
Mm-hmm.
progress, or I need to impress people because they know that I'm in therapy. And they forget we're still humans. Things happen, triggers happen. So
Mm-hmm.
it's that reminder that you're still moving
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm embarrassed because I didn't do, that tool you taught me or what we
Mm-hmm.
practiced.
Okay, that's really, yeah, I can see that's really powerful. And it's validating, right? It's validating the
Mhm.
person's experience, and that really goes a long way as well. So, just in a nutshell, what is narrative therapy? If you can describe that to us, just for our listeners.
Sure. So, narrative therapy is you as the client taking control of your narrative and describing where you would like to go.
Mm-hmm.
Within narrative therapy, there is something called externalization. And externalization is giving what you're facing as the problem sometimes humanistic characteristics. So, for example, someone that's battling anxiety, maybe we call anxiety the dark cloud, or maybe we call it a friend named Sue.
Mm-hmm.
And learning that, maybe you and Sue have been best friends, but maybe you need to be distant friends. And then taking that perspective of the externalization and applying it back to anxiety. So, how can you and Sue become more distant? That I would say is very, for me personally, in my experience, has been a tangible um, practice for many people, because
Mm-hmm.
they're then able to recognize this anxiety or whatever that they're battling with isn't a part of me. I can see it outside of myself versus seeing it inside of myself.
Okay, so that's really empowering for sure. Really
Mhm.
reframing, that
Yes.
yeah, that which is really
Mhm.
yeah, amazing. That's good. And I also do like narrative therapy as well. I think it is, yeah, it's very effective. It's
It
practical, right?
is.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, so Black families now, Caribbean families, you mentioned that you're Nigerian and Jamaican, right?
Mhm.
And so I also have a Caribbean background, Jamaican, Trinidadian, and so
Ooh.
and I remember years ago when I went to Jamaica. So this is years and years ago. Probably shouldn't have said the island, but doesn't matter. Where I talked about mental health, and I remember someone said to me, "We don't have that here." Now this is years ago. Now I know that there has been a lot of education and talk, and it's more widely talked about. But I
Mhm.
remember hearing years ago when I went to say, they were like, "No, we don't have no mental health issues here, right?"
Oh, wow.
And so I guess what I want to talk about really now is that whole it being taboo. I think it's not as taboo, I guess, as it was, but what's your experience now working with Black, Caribbean, African families or people, and really bringing forth this idea around, let's talk about our mental health, even if it's not so much a problem that we have, especially if there's a problem, but just kind of managing our day-to-day lives. What's the
Mhm.
reception around that?
I find with the older generation in particular, it
Hmm.
just doesn't exist to them.
Hmm.
It's maybe you're not praying hard enough, or
Hmm.
well, what is that? Or you just need to focus on something else. I
Hmm.
find for the younger generation, they are trying more to learn and connect with themselves, but then the
Hmm.
issue lies with, okay, I'm doing all this work and learning about myself, but I want to feel validated by my parents. And
Hmm.
now the same parents do not
Hmm.
want to validate that because A, they didn't grow up like that. B, you're a child to their in their eyes, even if you're an
Hmm.
adult. Who
Hmm.
are you to tell me what I need to do?
Hmm.
Um, or C, it's the first thing you'll hear sometimes is, why are you going and telling people my business?
Hmm.
Who is this person? Who does
Yes.
this person know? Are
Yes.
they going to tell my business?
Yes.
And it becomes this like a shame piece that you're not allowed to go and share because it's an unwritten rule of, what happens here stays here. Who are you to go and tell this random stranger who I am? And it
Mhm.
turns into a very difficult conversation for many people because now they see the progress on one hand, like I'm working, I'm doing all these things, but on the other hand, the person or persons that I want to validate my experience don't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And boy, there is nothing more isolating than shame and guilt,
Yeah.
right? We
Hmm.
don't speak, we'll stay alone with that, and then we'll start to internalize, and that's where we start to see a lot of problems, sort of rise and come out and show itself in different ways. So, huh, yeah, what a challenge! What a challenge!
Yeah,
So in your
absolutely.
and I know that you're really passionate about this. So why do you think that is? Why do you think we have that in our roots?
I
This.
I mean, historically, if we go back to slavery and things like that,
Mhm,
um, it stems from back there because there were
mhm,
even some slaves that would still um, rat out, for lack of a better term,
mhm,
if somebody was trying to escape, if
mhm,
somebody was trying to make a better life, they didn't tell. So
mhm,
it did create this grouping of you're my family, you have this loyalty, whatever happens here, you don't tell anybody else.
mhm,
And then post slavery, now we are left with people whom still have these beliefs that have been passed down from generation to generation that, okay, if I hit you at home, it's fine. This is what happens at our home. You can't
mhm,
tell anybody.
mhm,
And you create this fear, but not only with the fear, you create this loyalty to the fear
mm,
that even though I do these bad things, even though I abuse you and I belittle you, that's okay because I'm your parent, or that's okay because we're family. And then to the person that does want to stand up and say, I don't agree with this, then they become isolated. Like,
mhm,
oh, so and so has gone crazy, they'll say. They went to go see a shrink. That's a
mhm,
common word I'll
mhm,
still hear these days.
mhm.
And now they think they're a big woman or they think they're a big man, and they can come and say these things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's something that we really, and I'm glad, and you've noticed as well that the younger generation is much more open to talking about mental health and being candid about it and saying, look, there is something here that I need to talk about, but there is still that generational gap that you're talking
Hmm.
about. And so, yes, really key. So I know we're just getting set to go and take a break. So
Hmm.
definitely when we come back from our break, we're going to continue our talk with Annmarie Etuk Campbell, who is a psychotherapist practicing in Toronto. Are you taking
I'm
on?
in, I'm in
Sorry,
I'm
go
in
ahead.
Markham.
You're in
No, it's
Markham.
okay. I'm in
Okay,
Markham.
okay, all
Yeah.
right. Thanks for clarifying. And are
Yeah.
you taking on clients now?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
I see clients in person in the York region and virtual all over Canada.
all over Canada. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will rejoin with Annmarie when we come back from our break. See you soon. Okay, welcome back. Thank you so much. We are here just to refresh you. We're speaking with psychotherapist Annmarie Etuk Campbell, who is a practicing psychotherapist. She has her psychotherapy, I want to say firm, but that's probably not the right term, really. Is it a firm or practice?
Practice.
Practice, yeah. Psychotherapy
Yeah.
services called Supply the Change. And we are just talking now about, we're getting into now our conversation around avoidance. I know when I had my little pre-talk with you, I asked, is there anything you really want to make sure you talk about? And you called it avoidance. And I think we're kind of getting into that conversation now, where what we find with, the Black Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean communities in the diaspora. So here, GTA, Toronto, Canada, it's something that we face and we struggle with as service providers, as clinicians, where, we want to be able to create a safe space where people can come and talk and seek out services from, like yourself, Annmarie, to really deal with some of life's challenges. And
Yes.
so the avoidance is something that yeah, is pretty strong within our community. And I'll just
Mhm.
say this quickly before I have you respond. It's not just the Black community. We understand there are other cultures who definitely prize on, prize more resilience, and that resilience at the cost of, not being quite honest and open about real struggles, having shame, having guilt, being isolated. So it's not just the Black community, but this is what we're focusing on today. But I wanted to just put that out there. And so avoidance, like, yeah, continue. Talk to me about that. Dissect that for me a little bit more.
Yes. So I believe with what I've seen in practice, even what I've experienced as well, when you go through life through the lens of, I'm not allowed to talk about this
Mm-hmm.
has to, I have to keep it to myself, you slowly start to get older and you grow up and you don't even recognize that you need help.
Mm,
Prior to even commencing my master's, getting help wasn't a thought.
mm,
It was through my master's they said, hey, like if you're gonna do this, you need to know what it's like to be on the other end.
mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really great recommendation.
Yeah.
But when I reflect, if I didn't do my master's, I don't believe I would have um, gone that route. And that's just
Mm,
simply because what's happening at home, it stays at home. And I've
yeah.
heard that story not only from clients, but even other family members,
Mm-hmm.
friends who have had that same experience, because there is still that guilt and shame of, who's this person you're sharing my business to? Why are you sharing my business with them? What does that look like? And then
Mm-hmm.
not only does that create an avoidance of how you're feeling internally in response to what it's like being at home, but there also is that avoidance of sharing with other people. So let's say
Mm-hmm.
you don't even go to therapy, maybe some friends or family members that could have been your lifeline, could have been your confidant, they're not even there to support you and become a protective factor in your life because
Mm-hmm.
you're raised that you have to do life on your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Which is really, really challenging. And like I said, it's very isolating, right? And then I
Mhm.
love how you really raise that point around, then you become an adult and you realize, wow, like I've developed this habit. I mean, and maybe we not even be may not even be aware of it, but you now become an adult and things have been so ingrained in the way that you're dealing with things. Now you're potentially passing it on to another generation, your children or your nieces or nephews, and this is how this kind of passes on from generation to generation. And then we know when things become a habit, it's really hard to break habit forming behaviors, right?
Yes, absolutely. I even think of it sometimes where something to us that could have been simple of, okay, keep all the doors locked, I'm leaving, I
Mm,
have to work, don't answer the door for anyone,
mm,
don't answer the phone. To
mhm.
us, that could have been day to day life. What's
Yeah,
wrong with that?
yeah.
But then when you grow older, it's like, oh, I was this age or that age. I actually shouldn't have been home alone. I shouldn't, but it's something as small as that that people don't realize can be traumatizing, because
Yes.
trauma is not only what happens to you, it could also be the lack of something happening to you.
Okay. I love that. I really love that point. So trauma is not only what happens to you, but it could also be the lack of what was not happening for you or to
Hmm.
you. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. That's a powerful point. I like that. So, what are some of the ways? I know we have these podcasts, we have persons like yourself that who are, doing that work and dedicated to really kind of to break down those stigmas around mental health and avoidance and within our communities and so forth, and education and all of that stuff. Is there
Mhm.
any gap that you're seeing? Is there anything that we need to continue to forge ahead with, even with maybe within our families, within our peers?
I believe there still needs to be that space within the older generation. I do still have hope.
Mm-hmm.
Some do later on in life recognize, oh, maybe that wasn't great, or when their children don't speak to them anymore, then they start to reflect, why are
Mm-hmm.
my kids not talking to me?
Yeah.
Um, I think surprisingly, maybe having more support groups for the older crowd. I
Mm.
find the younger crowd and even the middle aged individuals, they do have a solid, okay, I can go to this support. They have someone that they can pinpoint, this is who I go to, this is where I go. But I find
Mm-hmm.
for the older generation, sometimes it's lack of understanding technology,
Mm.
etc. Um, they don't understand fully, or they don't even understand the power that can come
Mm.
from going to these groups, sharing these
Mm.
similar experiences. And maybe it's just because it's not out there for them because they're not the crowd, from my experience, anyways,
Mm-hmm.
that I see is focused on.
Right. That's really, I love that idea, really focusing in on, yeah, our older generations. I have found that the work that I have done with like older, my elders, um, they they have really shared. They, to
Mm,
the point where it's almost like, and not everybody, of course, but what
yes,
has left me is that they have shared and almost was like it was like a balloon waiting to release all that air,
yeah,
and they become in this space where they like, yeah, I needed to talk about this, or and there's lots of emotion and so on and so forth. Of course, that's just in my own little experience, right?
yes,
But I find that I think it is a really great idea when you talk about focusing in those areas, with our elders, because I think that some of them can be very ready to have that conversation.
yes, absolutely. And they just don't have the means
The
to.
means, yeah.
Um, and even if it was through grants, through something, but I
Mm.
find even in, like, let's take blackness out of it for a second.
Mm-hmm.
In general,
Mm-hmm.
there's not a lot of support for for
Yeah.
seniors, for elders.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you work all these years, you do all these this dedication to your job, to your field, and then you turn 65 plus and they leave you hanging.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
they'll tell you things like, oh, go online. I know they told my grandma that, for example, and
Mm.
she will call me like, Annie, how do I do this on the iPad, because I'm lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the
Exactly.
expectation versus the level at times, um it's not realistic, because some of our elders, they didn't even go to school. They
Yeah.
just came to Canada, they worked in the factory,
Mm-hmm.
to get their kids through school, because that was the focus. I need my kids to have a better life.
Yeah.
And now that they're older, it's difficult for them to even navigate the touchscreen phone. I'll
Mm-hmm.
still see
That's
some
right.
have the flip phone. Yeah, it's just those things that many people don't think about. But if maybe someone drove them, for example, or they had a dedicated bus or something,
Yeah.
that, okay, on Tuesdays you do this, they'll keep to the schedule.
Yeah.
It's just there's not that offering often.
Yeah, the accessibility. Absolutely. A
Hmm.
great point. So I'm sorry, is the sound okay? Are you hearing any background noise or is the sound okay?
No, it's okay.
Okay, okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
So in talking about that, I want to talk about grief and loss because that's something that you
Mm,
are passionate about and zero in on. And as we're talking even about, our elders and kind of going through life and now at this stage, there may be a lot of grief and loss and not necessarily, and you'll talk to us about this, not necessarily the losing of somebody, but maybe the losing of many things. It's loss in
mhm.
general. So if you
Yeah.
can talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Let's even start with like the loss of a job, because
Mhm.
that's something that's happening very often right now.
Yeah.
Just within the the economy. Um, every day well, not every day, but at some point in life, everyone will experience loss. And
Mm-hmm.
it may not be death directly,
Mm-hmm.
but we will experience some type of loss. When we experience loss, that's when we see whether or not the resiliency is there. Because for some people, they could have just been hanging on by a thread.
Mm-hmm.
Then when they experience that loss, that's when you'll hear midlife crisis or certain psychological illnesses that they were already predisposed to. That's when we
Mm-hmm.
see them starting to show up, and
Mm-hmm.
that's simply because of that loss.
Yes.
Sorry, I just feel like I'm gonna cough.
Yeah.
So when it comes to loss and grief within the Black community, I find that there's not really this space to do so. It'll
Mm-hmm.
be like, you're still upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
You're still sad about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
been 1 week. It's been 2 weeks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they quantify how
Yes.
long it takes to feel sad or to be upset about something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, as we know, grief, the loss of something can take on so many different forms and look so different depending on what's going on. But I love how you're
Mm,
framing it, that loss can be a trigger of what has been sort of dormant for potentially years and years, right? It's kind of like
yes.
it could be that straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing. And so, and particularly with COVID as well, like there was a lot of loss. And I think you're
Hmm.
right. And we can get stuck in this quantifying it. Well, losing a job is not really considered loss, or losing I don't know, a pet is not really considered loss, or whatever else it is. We quantify that's not considered a loss, and oh, you're still mourning over that. Shouldn't you be moving on with that? And so we quantify these things, and I really think that this is really valuable to be able to talk about grief and loss in a very broadened way, and
Hmm.
and recognize it as a significant trigger or a significant thing that we actually do need to process and we go through. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because what I often see actually is later on in life, maybe
Mm,
individuals are in their adolescence, even when they start having children, sometimes earlier, sometimes 30s, 40s,
mhm,
they start to then grieve the childhood that they never had. And that's not often spoken about, because when you're the person that's breaking those generational chains or the intergenerational trauma,
yeah.
you don't see it. It's just, I need to give my child a childhood I didn't experience. Then sometimes when your child starts to experience that childhood, it becomes, oh my goodness, I didn't even recognize
Mhm,
how bad my childhood was
mhm,
until I've now seen my child's experience. And
mhm,
there's some grief there. And it's
mhm,
like what I said earlier, that now you start to realize this was something that did not happen to me. And oftentimes, especially for women, seen as, you got to be the Black woman, you got to be strong, they don't even have those supports
mhm,
to recognize, hey, like, my child is 8, maybe at this age something happened to me that was traumatic.
mhm,
Now I'm becoming a helicopter parent. How do I operate through this lens? How do I allow them to have their own autonomy? There's not
mhm,
really anyone to talk to, because if
mhm,
you go to your parents at times, it could be, oh, you just do it, you remember your childhood, and then you're
mhm,
talking to the same person that triggered you at that
mhm,
age.
mhm,
And then it goes into that avoidance piece of, okay, I need to just deal with it, versus let me seek help, because
mhm,
again, this is my business, this is something I need to cope with. Nobody else might understand it, and yes, nobody might not have the same scenario or situation, but
mhm.
you holding it in hurts more.
That's
Oftentimes I tell my clients, trauma is like having a closed fist. When you're holding it so tight, your nails can penetrate through the skin, it can hurt you, versus when you release it, your fist still exists, your hand is still there, you
mm,
know it happened to you, but you're not holding so tight to it.
I like that. That's great. Yeah, I love
Mm.
that. That's really a powerful analogy. What would you just say to someone who's weighing the consequences, right? Because of you know um, disclosing or now saying that yes, this happened to me, and this is how I need to heal from this. What would you say to someone who's weighing that? if I was to come out with this, potentially the damage it may do. How do you kind of navigate people through that difficult time decision?
So the first thing that I like for people to acknowledge is, how is it hurting you? Because
Hmm.
oftentimes with that weighing, it's how is it going to hurt somebody else? And
Mm-hmm.
then that's where those people pleasing tendencies can come in. And you can say, okay, I can't hurt this person, even though the only person that's being impacted by it is you. The other
Hmm.
person may not even know it's impacted you, but you
Hmm.
are the one that's holding it in. It
Hmm.
does take a lot of courage to make that decision to stand up for yourself. But I would say to think about who you want to be. Do you
Hmm.
want to be the type of person that's still within this mindset of, I need to protect somebody else who didn't protect you, who didn't
Hmm.
have your best interest at heart? There's
Hmm.
so many secrets that we see day after day that people carry with them because they're afraid of how it might impact somebody else.
Right.
But day to day, they're the person that's impacted and having to carry that with them. I
Hmm.
would want someone who wants to make that first step in owning their healing story and owning their narrative, to understand that it's a big step. You're opening Pandora's box, for lack of
Hmm.
a better term, but who you want to be and that version of yourself that you imagine yourself to be could be inside of that box. And
Okay.
you're limiting yourself by not seeking out those resources, seeking out that help, because you are maybe even fearful of who you may become.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
with therapy, I will say, people might not understand you as much, because some people love your unhealed self, but
Mm.
your healed self that has those boundaries, they don't love that no more.
Hmm.
So it can be a lonely experience, because
Hmm.
as you are learning more about yourself and becoming more self-aware, some people don't like that,
Yeah.
but there are people that will like that.
Hmm.
And it's about weighing out those options of, do you want to honor yourself for the rest of your life, or do you want to honor others?
Right. Great point. Great point. So I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm looking at our time, and I wanted to touch on sort of, kind of some recommendations for the holidays and coming up to 2025. But before I go there, I wanted to talk about, because something that we hold very dear to us in our communities is our spiritual health, right? Our spiritual the way, our spiritual perspectives. So how
Mhm.
can we marry? What's your conversation in terms of marrying therapy to some of our very important spiritual nuggets that we hold very close to ourselves, that has basically formed and framed us? How do we marry
Mhm.
the two? Because I know right now the concept really is that they're quite separate. So how
Mhm.
do we marry the two? Because they can be very beautifully complementary.
Yes, I would say that the two can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be you're only spiritual or you're not spiritual. The
Mm-hmm.
two can coexist. Firstly, being maybe seeking out therapists who honor your spiritual practices.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's lots of different therapists that will put that within their writing,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, so you can feel better understood when you seek out help. I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe that the two need to be separated, and you're allowed to bring that into the session. If
Mm-hmm.
you say, this is how I feel spiritually, this is what happened, this is why I made that decision, that's completely okay. I've heard that multiple times by
Mm-hmm.
many people. I think the issue is, again, when the cultural practices come into the spiritual practices, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Okay.
Because in the spiritual practices, when you review them, oftentimes it doesn't say, don't go to therapy, don't seek help, don't.
Mm-hmm.
It'll tell you, love
Yep.
each other,
Yep.
help each other.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's when the culture gets involved, oh, um, God wouldn't want you to do this, or this
Mm-hmm.
spiritual practice wouldn't want you to do that. That's when it becomes limiting, because you don't have that capacity to to choose. It's
Right.
either you got to go this way or that way.
Right.
So I believe that the two can coexist very
Mhm,
healthily,
mhm,
actually. And
mhm,
oftentimes, from my experience, I've seen people who start therapy and their spirituality grows because
mhm,
they're feeling more in tune with themselves.
mhm.
And that in turn allows them to be more in tune with their spirituality.
Okay, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that was really important for us to sort of touch on and then make that distinction, right? That the two,
Yes.
they're not separate. It's actually
No.
about, and as you point out, talking with one another, helping one another, holding one another up, and that does not, yeah, that doesn't negate some, very foundational spiritual rules or practices. I wouldn't say rules, but beliefs, I'll say.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, we're getting ready. 2024 is ending now. We're getting into a new year. I want to stay away from resolutions and all that stuff, but is there anything that you think about, in terms of our mental health as a community that we need to kind of say, okay, it's a new year coming. This is where we need to kind of focus on. And I know I'm speaking collectively, but
Yes.
yeah.
I would say it's funny because my social media marketing manager and I, we actually did this advent calendar launch
Oh,
on social media.
okay.
Um so on our Instagram, Supply the Change PS, we
Uh-huh.
have this whole like advent calendar that we're doing um to tell people some like kind of tips every day as to, as you're getting ready for the holidays, what it looks like.
Right.
And our recent post we did was New Year, same you if you don't change those habits.
Hmm.
So I wanted to highlight that that's something that resonated with me when you brought up that question, because
Mhm,
oftentimes people make resolutions. Either
mhm.
they're making the resolutions now or they're feeling like the resolutions they made last year, they're trying to do it all in these 31 days so
Yeah,
it counts.
yeah.
um, and then with social media, it's not helpful at all because you'll hear, oh, it takes 15 days to build a habit. You just got to do it. You just have to do this.
Mhm.
And the research doesn't even show it takes 15 days to build a habit. Fun
Hmm,
fact.
hmm.
It shows that it takes 18 days to 266 days to build a habit.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
but I mean, 15 days sells, so why not?
Yeah.
But I believe in this season it's about intentionality. So it's
Mm,
not about making these resolutions and then now you're looking at 2023 resolutions that you made for this year and you're feeling poorly or you're feeling badly about yourself. It's
mhm.
important that in this season you set the intentions for what the expectations are going to be. If,
Love
for 2025, the focus is I just want to wake up every day and dress nice. That's okay.
that.
You can
Mhm,
absolutely make those goals, but
mhm,
you have to set the intention that this is something that I would like to do, and
mhm,
then you have to be proactive to do it.
mhm,
It's marketable and it's easy to say new year, new me, and
mhm,
all of those quotes that we see on Instagram, or I think of
mhm,
that woman that's stepping up those steps like, oh, I'm stepping on all these bad things like toxic people, etc.
mhm,
But that's not what the year is about, because um, for myself, you'll see people are in therapy from January all the way to like March, and
mhm,
when the sun comes back out, I don't need therapy again, and it's this cycle.
mhm.
So I believe when it comes to thinking of the new year, the first being we don't need to um do everything in these last 31 days. If you didn't do it in the last 11 months, come on. This one
Right,
month isn't going to
right,
change all of that. If
right,
you want to start it, that's lovely, great.
right.
Um, but don't be too hard on yourself, even if you didn't accomplish what you set out. Because this year was difficult for many people. What if surviving was just enough this year?
Mm,
That's
that's
okay.
it. That's it. I love that intentionality. Do it with intention.
Hmm.
That resonates so well. I love that. Anything for the holiday time. So I know that, we hear a lot about the holidays and we see that it's supposed to be a happy time and families together, but we know for some it could be a really challenging time. Is there anything
Mhm.
that you would say, like maybe if we were your clients coming to you to say, look, we're about to get together and I'm going to really feel a lot of anxiety or potentially maybe quite depressed or whatever else, what would you say about the holiday time coming up?
So, two things. The holiday season brings a duality of joy and grief.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, there is loss. Maybe there's people that you wanted to be that in the holiday season with you. Maybe it's friends. Maybe it's those that have passed on. So
Mm-hmm.
it can actually be a very triggering time. Remembering that your feelings matter, to process the emotions as they come. For
Mm-hmm.
some clients, it's helpful if they write a letter to the person. Maybe this is X year that I haven't been around you. I miss you. This is what I did this year. Sometimes that can be very therapeutic. When
Mm-hmm.
it comes to the actual family gatherings, I am
Mm-hmm.
a person that will always advocate and be big on boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
If you are going in a space that does not serve you or makes you feel bad about yourself, you do not have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes with families it's difficult, and people will say, well, I have to be there because of X or Y. But do you really have to be there, or are you choosing to be in that
Mm-hmm.
environment that's triggering you? Sometimes when you no longer go into those environments, that's when people recognize that they hurt you because now you stood up for yourself. I
Mm-hmm.
know with collectivistic cultures, especially within our Black culture,
Yeah.
that it's, oh, who cares? I know I haven't seen you for 1 year. My compliment to you is going to be, oh, you gained so much weight. How did you get so fat since I seen you the last year? You don't need to put yourself in those environments. It's not
Right.
positive.
Right.
And if you feel that you can't stand up for yourself in the moment, maybe it's skipping out this year and making your own traditions and
Mm.
seeing what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Because just because you have a tradition with your family doesn't mean you can't start your own tradition. And
Right.
I'm not promoting being individualistic and not saying you don't need community, but you need community that supports you and respects your boundaries. They
Mm-hmm.
don't know, maybe you were depressed this year, maybe you were going through binge eating. There's so many things that could have happened while you gained weight. Maybe you did even want to gain the weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just
Mm-hmm.
very disrespectful that some families to this day, that's the first comment they'll make.
Yeah.
Or, what are you doing in school? Or, why don't you have a job? You don't have to be questioned around the holiday season.
Mm-hmm.
I love what some people are doing now where they call it Friendsmas, and they'll actually celebrate Christmas with their friends, or
Okay.
they'll celebrate the holidays with their friends. They'll all have
Mm-hmm.
like a big dinner together.
Right.
But it's about setting those boundaries and ensuring that others know that, this is not, it's not the same you. You don't have to put up with that.
I love that, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much. And I think that that is really excellent tips, I would say, to leave us with as we're winding down 2024. We are going into the Christmas season or holiday season. And so I think that's really great. So I'll highlight setting boundaries, because we don't want to
Hmm.
fall into that people pleasing sort of thing. And like you said, you're not promoting, individualistic kind of ways. We are a collectivist. That's our part of our nature, our community. But if it means that you have to set boundaries to promote your wellness, do so. I love that. Recognizing and understanding that your feelings matter. I'm quoting you. And
Hmm.
that if you are going through or experiencing any kind of loss or grief during this holiday time, is to express that and write a letter of how you're feeling. Maybe writing a letter to that person that you have lost. And I also want to add too, and you did mention this as well, that loss is not just about a person, right? Loss is
Hmm.
anything. So I think even recognizing that you have experienced a loss and it's making you feel a way, it's really saying
Hmm.
that my feelings matter. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you so much, Annmarie Etuk Campbell, who is seeing clients. So look her up. She mentioned that she's on Instagram. Her her organization, excuse me, is Supply the Change Psychotherapy Services Inc. So look her up and put your mental wellness at the top of the list and be
Mhm.
intentional about it with 2025. So I'm loving that so much. Thank you, Annmarie, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. And like I said earlier, I hope whomever does, if anyone does contact me, I'm here to write your healing story here with you.
Excellent. We love that. Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay, perfect. We're no longer live. That was amazing. That
Okay.
was really, really, really good.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.